Shoot it if you mean to, Ruth said through chattering teeth. But do it now. I won't watch it die slow. Eli Mercer already had the rifle to his shoulder. Snow skated low across the trail, dry and mean, stinging his face like thrown salt. In the sage beside a split boulder, the gray bundle tried to rise. It bared tiny teeth, shook once, and collapsed back into the drift. One ear was torn. A hind leg dragged wrong. Its ribs stood out sharp under its hide. From the wagon behind them, May whispered, "Pa." Eli didn't answer. He kept the sight steady on the little wolf's chest. Then the pup made a sound that stopped him cold. Not a growl, not a cry, just one ragged breath, thin and stubborn, as if it hated the world too much to beg from it. Ruth saw his finger ease off the trigger. Eli. He lowered the rifle and stepped from the saddle. Snow squealed under his boots. The wind smelled of cedar bark, horse sweat, and the iron taste that comes before a hard freeze. The pup snapped when he reached for it, but the bite had no strength. Eli caught the scruff, turned the leg gently, and found the wire buried deep above the paw. "A snare," he said. Ruth's jaw tightened. Then somebody said it for a reason. He looked up at the ridge. The trap line ran across Voss Range. Everybody knew it. Harlan Voss killed wolves, coyotes, stray dogs, and sometimes any living thing that crossed land he wanted. Eli slid his knife from his belt. The blade flashed dull in the white light. The pup twisted, teeth clicking against his glove, while he worked the wire free one stubborn strand at a time. Caleb climbed down from the wagon despite Ruth's warning. At 12, he had his father's long bones and his mother's cautious eyes. "Is it gonna die?" "Not if it's too foolish," Eli said. The wire finally came loose with a sticky snap. Blood darkened the fur. The pup sagged in his hands, shaking from pain and hunger. Eli shrugged off his coat and wrapped it before the wind could cut deeper. Ruth stared at him as if he had brought up a snake instead of a half-dead animal. "We have 2 children, one thin winter, and not enough feed for what already breathes under our roof." "I know what we have." "Do you?" she asked softly. "Because mercy gets costly out here." He held her gaze a moment, then carried the bundle to the wagon. May moved over without being told. Her mittened hands hovered, afraid to touch. The pup smelled of blood, pine sap, and wild cold. Eli laid it on a folded grain sack. "We take it home," he said. Ruth looked toward the darkening west. The sky had gone the color of old lead. "And when Voss hears?" Eli climbed back into the saddle. "Then he hears." The storm hit before they reached the lower pasture. Wind hammered the wagon canvas until it popped like musket fire. The horses dropped their heads and pushed on. By the time the cabin lamps glowed through the blowing white, Eli's beard was crusted solid and his hands had gone numb around the reins. Inside, heat struck like a slap. The one-room kitchen smelled of wood smoke, onion broth, and wet wool drying by the stove. Eli set the pup on the table while Ruth hissed in protest, then shoved a kettle aside so he could work. He washed the wound with boiled water. The little beast came alive under his hands, snarling and thrashing until Caleb pinned the shoulders and May bit her lip hard enough to blanch it. "Hold him steady," Eli said. "Him?" May asked. Eli glanced between the hind legs. "Him." Ruth handed over strips torn from one of Eli's old shirts. She did it with an unhappy face, but she handed them over all the same. "If he takes my fingers, I'll haunt you." "He won't." "How can you know?" Eli tied the bandage. "Because he still wants to live." That answer settled nothing. Still, Ruth warmed goat milk with broth and poured it into a spoon. The pup refused twice, then drank like a creature falling into a river. Milk dribbled down his narrow muzzle. His eyes stayed half shut, but the tail gave one weak thump against the table. May smiled for the first time all day. "See?" Ruth wiped the spill with a cloth. "I see trouble breathing." They bedded him in a crate by the stove. Through the evening, Eli mended harness in the corner while the children pretended not to watch the crate every few minutes. Outside, the wind prowled around the cabin walls, pressing smoke back down the chimney until the room filled with the bitter smell of pine and soot. Each time the pup stirred, Ruth's shoulders tightened. At supper, Caleb asked the question everyone had been turning over. "You gonna keep him?" Eli broke cornbread into his bowl, long enough for him to stand. "And then he belongs to the hills." May set down her spoon with a small clack. "Not if he wants to stay." "Especially then," Ruth said. No one spoke after that. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons, the hiss of the lamp, and the occasional frail whimper from the crate. Eli tried to keep his eyes on his food, but memory kept finding him. A winter ridge, a rifle crack, a wolf dropping against snow, while something inside the brush cried out afterward. He had not told Ruth about that day, had not told anyone. The West buried enough ghosts without help. Near midnight, the pup woke wild with pain. He slammed himself against the crate, snarling so sharply that May bolted upright in her trundle bed, and Caleb reached for the fireplace poker. "Leave it," Eli said. He knelt, opened the crate slowly, and let the animal see his hand before he touched him. The pup's breath came hot and fast. Eli laid a palm on the thin ribs until the trembling eased. Under that hand, the heart hammered like a trapped bird. At dawn, he followed the trail back alone. The storm had stripped the world clean and cruel. Snow crust snapped under his boots. Half a mile above the boulder, he found the she-wolf caught dead in Voss wire, frozen with her body twisted toward the place her pup had lain. Not 10 yards away lay a calf carcass with its throat cut neat by a blade. Eli crouched there a long time, cold gnawing through his coat. By the time he rode home, anger had burned hotter than the weather. He had just unsaddled when hoofbeats pounded into the yard. Harlan Voss came through the gate with 3 riders and a dead calf slung across a mule. Blood dripped black into the snow. Voss's smile never reached his pale eyes. "Evening, Mercer. Heard you brought a wolf under your roof." Eli said nothing. Voss tipped his chin toward the carcass. "Then I reckon you know why I'm here." He slid his rifle from the scabbard nice and easy. "By sunrise, you hand that beast over. If you don't, I'll kill it where it sleeps, and anything that stands between us." The yard went still enough to hear the mule breathing. Ruth stepped onto the porch with the lantern in one hand and the shotgun in the other. Its barrels caught the yellow light. Caleb stood behind her with his jaw locked. May clutched the doorframe, pale but unflinching. Eli moved 1 pace forward, close enough to smell calf blood and saddle leather on Voss. "That animal in my house couldn't drag a bootlace, much less kill stock." Voss shrugged. "Folks hear wolf. Folks don't ask size. That your way of saying truth no longer matters? My way of saying truth belongs to the man who can hold land long enough to speak it." Snowmelt dripped from the eaves. Somewhere in the dark, a horse stamped. Eli could feel Ruth's eyes on the back of his neck, could feel the children listening not just for words, but for the kind of man their father would be when pressed. He looked at the dead calf. The throat was still too clean. No tearing, no ragged panic. "Knife work. You know what did that," Eli said. Voss smiled again, slow as a gate swinging open. "Sunrise." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following in a crunch of frost and hoof iron. The mule dragged the calf through the yard, leaving a dark ribbon behind it. Ruth did not lower the shotgun until the riders vanished past the cottonwoods. When she did, her hands were steady. "Well," Eli turned toward the house. "I won't give him the pup." May let out the breath she had been holding. Caleb said nothing, but his shoulders eased. Ruth stared at Eli for a long moment, lantern light marking the tired lines around her eyes. "That choice," she said quietly, "belongs to all of us now." Inside, the cabin felt smaller. Ash was awake in the crate, ears pricked at the scent of strangers. May had named him before dawn because his muzzle looked blackened by soot. Eli had said nothing against it. Naming was dangerous. It made a thing harder to lose. They took turns sleeping. Before first light, Eli saddled up and rode to town with the dead she-wolf snare wire in his pocket and anger riding with him. Red Hollow was just beginning to wake. Smoke rose blue from chimneys. A hammer rang at the livery. Men turned to watch him pass, then looked away too slow to hide the curiosity. Marshal Tom Bell heard him out in front of the feed store, one thumb hooked in his vest. Bell was thick through the middle, careful with his words, and too used to weighing peace against justice. "You saying Voss baited the kill?" Bell asked. "I'm saying that calf was cut, not torn." Bell scratched his gray mustache. "You got proof. I got eyes." Not the same thing in court. Across the street, Harlan Voss stood on the mercantile porch drinking coffee, as if he had not spent the night making threats. 2 ranchers laughed at something he said. Eli watched their easy faces and felt the town shifting already, fear moving among people the way wind moves through dry grass. Bell lowered his voice. "Best end this quick, Eli. Hand over the wolf and keep your place." "My place stays mine because I keep it." Your place stays yours because the bank says so. That hit where Belle meant it to. Eli's note was due after calving. Ruth had stretched flour, patched coats, and sold preserves all winter to buy time. But time was a thing Voss purchased in bulk. Eli thanked the marshal without warmth and rode home harder than he should have. The days that followed were narrow, tense things. Eli worked fence, chopped ice from the trough, and checked the ridge for sign of Voss riders. Ruth milked, baked, and kept the household moving with the sort of calm that shamed weaker people. Caleb helped in the barn before dawn. May lived by the stove crate, reading scraps of old primers aloud to the wolf as if words themselves might gentler him. Ash healed crooked but strong. He snapped less. He ate with ferocious concentration, as if every meal might be stolen. When the bandage came off, he put weight on the leg and glared at Eli like a rival who had done him one favor too many. He don't like you, Caleb said. Eli straightened from the crate. He doesn't trust easy. Like you, Ruth said from the wash basin. Eli almost smiled. Almost. One afternoon, he found a second calf dead near the north fence. This one had been chewed after death, enough to fool a careless eye, but the first wound was again a blade under the jaw. He followed sign through the junipers until hoofprints turned toward Voss land. At the creek crossing, he found a brass button torn from a coat cuff. Voss's foreman, Deke Sutter, wore a line of them every Sunday in town. When Eli showed Ruth the button, she sat very still at the table. The lamp painted gold across her knuckles. If you push this, Harlan will push harder. He already is. He wants the creek strip, Eli. You know that. Their lower pasture held the only reliable water for 3 miles in a dry year. Without it, Voss had to swing his herds wide and lose time. With it, he could control the valley. He offered again? Eli asked. Ruth nodded once. At church, while you were talking with Belle. The anger in him came up cold. And I told him I'd rather boil mesquite bark than take his money. That time he did smile, brief and fierce. Ruth looked down so he would not see her own mouth soften. When spring finally loosened the ground, Ash outgrew the crate. He paced the shed with restless energy, nose lifted to every breeze, every crow call, every far coyote song at dusk. May cried the day Eli opened the pen gate. He'll leave. He must, Eli said. Ash stood in the doorway, gray coat bright in the afternoon sun. One scarred hind leg held a shade stiff. He looked back once. Not at May, not at the house, at Eli. Then he vanished into the tall grass. Summer passed, then another winter, then another. Sometimes they saw him on the ridge at dawn, larger now, lean as smoke, yellow eyes bright above the pasture. Once he dragged a deer haunch to the edge of the yard and left before sunrise. Once May whistled from the porch and a distant answering howl rolled back through the dark timber. The family changed around those seasons. Ruth bore a third child, little Hannah, red-faced and furious at the world. Caleb grew into his shoulders. May grew quieter, stronger, carrying hidden things in that silence. Eli paid part of the note, then fell behind when drought burned the hay thin and mean. On the hottest August morning any of them could remember, dust rose on the south road in a broad yellow wall. Caleb shaded his eyes from the barn roof. Riders. Eli stepped from the forge, hammer still in hand. Heat shimmered over the yard. Locusts screamed in the cottonwoods. Down by the gate, Harlan Voss came at the head of 7 men, a folded paper in his fist and a grin on his face that promised judgment before the law had even found its boots. By the time the riders reached the yard, the air itself felt ready to burn. Eli set the hammer down beside the anvil and wiped his hands on his trousers. The forge still pulsed behind him, breathing sparks and coal heat. Ruth stepped onto the porch with Hannah on her hip. May came from the chicken yard carrying a bucket. Caleb slid from the barn ladder and took his place by the gatepost, trying hard to look older than 16. Voss unfolded the paper with a theatrical snap. County notice, he said. Debt default. Water rights review. Temporary seizure pending payment. Eli did not take the paper. Temporary theft by fancier words. Voss chuckled. Read it if you like. You've got until sundown to clear your stock off the lower pasture. After that, men start fencing. Ruth came down the porch steps. That note isn't due until the end of month. Wasn't, Voss said. Bank sold it. To you, Eli said. Voss tipped his hat without shame. To me. Hot wind moved through the yard carrying dust, hot iron, and the faint sharp smell of creosote baking in the posts. Eli heard Hannah start crying against Ruth's shoulder. He heard Caleb's breath go quick. He heard, beyond all of it, the old trap in his own chest closing again. The one built from bad years, lost chances, and men like Harlan Voss who mistook patience for surrender. "I'm not moving," Eli said. Voss's pale eyes flattened. "Then we do this the hard way." He turned his horse and rode toward the south fence. His men spread behind him like a comb through dry grass. Eli grabbed Caleb's arm before the boy could lunge for the barn rifle. "No, he's taking our land. He wants you hot. Don't give him that." But by noon the first fence posts were already going in along the creek. Eli saddled his gelding and rode down alone, stopping just short of Voss's men. Deke Sutter drove a staple with 3 ugly blows and looked up smiling. "You planning to work or just watch?" Deke asked. Eli swung from the saddle and ripped the new wire back out of the post with gloved hands. "I'm planning to remove trash." Everything went sharp after that. Deke came at him with the hammer. Eli ducked, drove a shoulder into the foreman's ribs, and both men hit the dirt hard enough to grunt. Dust blasted up around them. Someone shouted. A horse reared. Eli got one fist into Deke's mouth before 2 riders dragged him off. Blood ran down Deke's chin. One of Voss's men cocked a revolver. "Enough," Voss said lazily. Eli spat grit and stood. "You'll need more paper than that." Voss looked toward the house. "Maybe. Fire uses less." He rode off, smiling again. Eli felt cold despite the heat. At dusk, the first smoke rose from the lower pasture. May saw it from the porch and screamed. Caleb was already running before Eli reached the yard. Wind shoved the flames flat through the grass, fast and hungry, turning the field into a sheet of moving copper. Cattle bawled and crashed against the far fence. Sparks blew toward the barn roof. "Ruth," Eli shouted. "Take Hannah to the creek bed." Ruth did not argue. She thrust the baby into May's arms, seized 2 wet blankets from the wash line, and ran for the smokehouse where cured meat hung for winter. If the fire reached it, they lost half their cold months with one spark. Caleb headed for the corral. Eli caught a glimpse of him vaulting the gate, trying to cut the panicked horses loose. Then a rider burst through the smoke. Deke, gun in hand. The shot cracked past Caleb's head and punched splinters from the rail. Eli was moving before thought caught up. He hit Deke's horse from the side with enough force to throw the man half out of the saddle. The revolver went off into the dirt. Caleb cut the horses free. They exploded from the corral in a storm of foam, eyes white, manes singeing as they thundered past. Another shot, this one from the hill. May cried out. Eli spun. Hannah was wailing in the yard. May crouched over her near the trough, and a bullet had shattered the wood just inches from the girl's hand. Ruth came through smoke carrying the wet blankets, face blackened with soot. Inside, Eli yelled. "No," she yelled back. "Ruth's catching." He looked once and saw she was right. Sparks had already taken in the dry shingles above the kitchen. The barn doors slammed in the wind. One hinge screamed. Heat licked across his face. Then a gray shape shot through the smoke so fast it seemed born from it. Ash, larger than memory, scars still bright on the hind leg, coat silver black in the firelight. He went straight for Hannah, planted himself between the child and the hill, and snarled toward the hidden shooter with such savage force that the horses in the yard skittered sideways. For one stunned second nobody moved. Then Ash broke left, not away from the family, but toward the gully behind the house. He stopped, looked back, barked once, sharp, commanding, and vanished into the smoke. "Pa," May shouted, eyes wide. "He's showing us out." Another bullet slapped mud from the trough. Eli made the choice at once. "Gully," he roared. "Now." Ruth grabbed Hannah. Caleb covered May with his own body as they ran bent low through heat and ash. Eli fired twice toward the ridge, not to hit, only to slow the shooter. They plunged into the dry wash while flames rolled over the yard above them like a living thing. The gully twisted behind the north pasture and up into rocky ground where no horse could easily follow. Ash kept appearing ahead through the smoke, then vanishing again, always just far enough to draw them onward. Twice he doubled back, teeth bared, when Sparks blew too close to Hannah's blanket. Behind them came hoofbeats. Voss had sent riders around. The family scrambled up a shale slope toward an abandoned line shack tucked under pines. Halfway there, Caleb stumbled hard. He got up, took 2 more steps, and fell to one knee. Blood spread dark through his sleeve. Ruth's face went white under the soot. He's hit. Hoofbeats were closing. Fire crawled below. Night was coming fast. Eli got his son's good arm over his shoulders and hauled him upward. The line shack door hung crooked in its frame 10 yards ahead. Ash stood there in the gloom, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the trail beneath them. Then, down in the smoke-red dark, lanterns began to bloom one by one as Voss's riders formed a ring around the hill. The line shack smelled of old pine, mouse droppings, and the faint cold ash of fires burned by men long gone. Eli shoved the door shut with a timber brace while Ruth cleared the rough table in the center of the room. Caleb bit down on a folded rag as Eli cut away the shirt sleeve. The bullet had scored through the flesh high in the arm, a furrow more than a hole, but it had bled hard on the climb. May held the lamp. The flame trembled only once. "Look at me," Ruth told her son. Caleb did. Sweat stood on his face. He was trying not to shake. Ruth poured whiskey over the wound. Caleb made a strangled sound and kicked the table leg, then mastered himself before it turned into a cry. Eli packed the groove with clean cloth and bandaged it tight, while Hannah, exhausted from fear, slept against May's shoulder. Outside, darkness settled into the pines. Wind moved through the branches with a dry whisper. Every so often came the pop of distant fire or the faint ring of tack from riders below. They were waiting. Men were good at waiting when hunger belonged to somebody else. Ash lay just beyond the threshold where the lantern reached him in strips. He had not tried to enter. His flanks rose and fell slowly now. There was blood on one shoulder, not his own. May knelt by the open crack under the door and slid out a tin plate of water. The wolf watched her hand, then drank without taking his eyes off the darkness. Ruth leaned back against the wall after tying Caleb's bandage. For the first time since the fire began, her strength showed its cost. Soot streaked her face. Her hair had come loose and stuck damply to her neck. Eli looked at her and saw, all at once, how many storms she had crossed beside him without once asking if there might have been an easier man to marry. "I should have fought him years ago," he said. Ruth laughed once, without humor. "You did, just never all the way." He sat opposite her, elbows on his knees. The lamplight carved deep lines into his hands. "Sam wanted me to stand with him when Voss started cutting fences on widow land. I told him I had my own place to keep. Next week, Sam was found in the creek bed with a broken skull, and folks called it a fall." May lifted her head. Caleb went still. Ruth looked at Eli as if she had waited a long time for that sentence. "I knew there was more. I knew, too." His voice roughened. "Not proof. Not enough for Belle. But enough for me. And I said nothing because I had you. And then Caleb, and fear sounds practical when it puts bread on a table." The shacks settled around them, wood clicking softly in the cooling night. Caleb swallowed. "So he kept coming because you let him." The words struck clean because they were true. Eli nodded once. "Yes." No one rushed to soften it. That was mercy too, sometimes, letting truth stand on its own feet. After a while, Ruth crossed to the peg by the door where her scorched satchel hung. From it, she took a small Bible wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, tucked between worn pages, lay a folded survey map and a letter with an official seal broken long ago. "Sam gave me these before he died," she said. "Said if anything happened, keep them dry and keep them quiet." Eli stared. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were a man living half inside old guilt and half inside next month's bills. I needed you alive more than righteous." She laid the documents on the table. The map marks the original creek easement. The letter shows the railroad rejected Voss's first bid because our strip controls the pass road. That's why he keeps coming. Not cattle, not wolves. The road. May traced the edge of the paper with one finger. "So if people see this, they'll see motive," Ruth said. "Maybe enough for Belle to stop looking away." Outside, Ash gave a low warning growl. Everyone froze. Lanterns had moved higher below the shack. Faint orange dots between trunks. Men dismounting. Boots on stone. May reached inside her dress and drew out a narrow bone whistle on a leather cord. Eli recognized the cord at once. Braided red strip from an old harness strap he had once given her for doll reins. "You've been calling him," he said. She nodded, eyes never leaving the door. "Since the first winter he left. Not every day. Only when I had scraps. Only when I missed him." Ruth almost smiled despite the danger. "That explains the missing bacon." May looked ashamed for half a breath, then stubborn again. He never took from us when we were hungry. Eli glanced through the crack. Ash had risen to his feet, ears high, body aimed downhill like an arrow not yet released. On his scarred hind leg the old snare mark gleamed pale in the moonlight. Eli opened the door just enough to slip out and crouch beside him. The night smelled of resin, dust, and the sour edge of smoke lingering in the valley. For a moment man and wolf simply listened together. "You came back?" Eli murmured. Ash flicked one ear but did not look at him. Eli reached carefully toward the shoulder matted with blood. Beneath the fur he found not a wound, but a torn strip of coat cloth snagged on claw or fence. "Deeks." He pulled it free. Brass button still hanging. Proof enough for any honest eye to tie fire to Voss's men. Behind him Ruth spoke softly from the doorway. "Mercy ain't obedience, Eli." He turned. Her face in the moonlight was tired, fierce, and impossibly dear. "You don't owe Voss peace. You owe these children a father who finally stands where he means to stand." Below them a branch snapped. Someone cursed under his breath. Eli rose. The old trap in his chest broke at last, not with a clean sound, but with a long tearing one. Fear remained. Men who claimed they felt none were liars or fools. But fear no longer held the reins. He went back inside and rolled out the survey map. "There's a cut through the east rocks," he said. "Narrows enough that riders must come single file. Past that, the spring box feeds the irrigation ditch. If we open the gate, the shelf turns slick and steep." Caleb pushed himself upright, pale but intent. "Funnel them. Slow them," Eli said. "Long enough for daylight and witnesses." "Witnesses?" May asked. Ruth touched the letter. "Bell rides patrol north every dawn after fire season starts. If he sees smoke at our place and riders on our hill, he may come." And Ada Miller said once she'd testify against Voss if somebody gave her the courage first. Eli looked at each of them in turn. Wife, son, daughter, sleeping baby, and the wolf waiting in the dark like a promise he had not earned but had been given anyway. "We leave at first, Gray," he said. Outside, Ash lifted his muzzle toward the stars and let out one long, rolling howl. From the valley below came the sudden answer of angry men spurring their horses uphill. The first light came thin and blue through the pines, turning the smoke in the valley to ghost cloth. Eli barred the door one last time behind them and led the family east along the narrow shelf above the ravine. Caleb carried the rifle in his good hand. Ruth bore Hannah wrapped tight against her chest and kept one hand on May's shoulder when the path crumbled. Ash ranged ahead, then behind, never far, a gray flicker among stone and cedar. Below, Voss's riders saw them and shouted. "Move," Eli said. The shelf bent toward the spring box, a rough timber gate built years ago to feed water into Mercer ditch before it dropped down to the lower pasture. In wet months it barely mattered. In drought it mattered like scripture. Eli had repaired it every year with his own hands. Now he looked at the swollen holding pool above the gate and knew exactly what it could do on loose shale. "Ruth, take the children to the Narrows," he said. "Don't stop." She understood at once. That was one gift of long marriage. Some decisions arrived, already shared. "And you?" she asked. "I'll open it." Caleb started to protest. Eli cut him off with a look. "Your job is your mother." That held him silent. They went. Eli waited until Voss's lead riders committed to the shelf, hooves striking sparks from rock as they climbed in single file. Deke came first, arms still bruised from the creek fight, hatred making him careless. Eli slammed the gate pin loose with a fence maul. Water burst through with a roar. It hit the shelf like a herd breaking through brush. Mud, stones, and shale went with it. Deke's horse lost footing at once, screamed, and went over the side backward, taking the rider behind him into a spray of broken rock. Men shouted. Horses plunged and jammed the trail. Eli ran before the splash of debris settled. He caught up with his family at the Narrows just as a shot cracked from farther back. Stone chips bit his cheek. Voss had dismounted and climbed higher with two men, using the boulders for cover. The Narrows were exactly what Eli remembered, two leaning walls of red rock, with only one clean way through. On the far side stood the old survey marker Sam had set with him years before, iron stakes still driven deep in the earth. Seeing it hit Eli harder than the bullet chip had. "Here," he said. They took positions fast. Caleb prone behind a stone, face white with pain but steady. Ruth crouched with Hannah shielded in a cleft behind her. May beside Ash, hand on the bone whistle though she did not raise it yet. Eli stood where Voss could see him if he wanted what he had come for. Voss emerged at last over the slick shelf, coat torn, boots muddy, revolver drawn. Deke limped behind him with a rifle. The third rider had more fear than stomach and hung back. Voss looked around at the stone walls, then at Eli. Done running. Done yielding. Voss laughed softly. You think a marker in rock saves you? Bank paper says otherwise. Ruth lifted the letter high enough to catch the news sign. Railroad bid. Creek easement. Signed and stamped. Something changed in Voss's face. Not guilt. Calculation. He realized, in one bare second, that this had stopped being a family he could scare and started becoming a story other people might hear. Give me that, he said. No, Ruth answered. Deke raised his rifle toward her. May blew the whistle. Ash launched before the note had even died. He did not go for Voss. He went for Deke, the man with the long gun. They hit in a blur of gray and brown. The rifle fired wild into the rocks. Deke screamed and crashed sideways, clawing at the wolf's shoulders while Ash dragged him down the slope. Everything broke loose. Caleb fired once from the stone and shattered the revolver in Voss's hand. Ruth snatched Hannah lower behind cover. Eli rushed forward as Voss pulled a derringer from his boot with the other hand, a backup for a faithless man. The little gun came up toward May. Eli was too far. Ash wasn't. He left Deke bleeding in the shale and slammed into Voss from the side just as the derringer fired. The shot went into the sky. Voss staggered, lost footing on the wet rock, and pitched backward over the edge of the shelf. His fingers caught a root jutting from the bank. For one long second, he hung there above 20 feet of broken stone and the half-drained ditch below. Mercer, he gasped. Help me. Everything narrowed. Eli saw the man who had burned his land, threatened his children, killed his brother, and turned truth into a thing bought and sold. He also saw May staring wide-eyed. Caleb braced for another shot. Ruth holding the letter that could end years of fear, and Ash standing over Voss with blood on his muzzle and the old snare scar white as bone. Earlier in life, Eli might have stepped back and called it justice. Now he dropped flat and caught Voss's wrist. Their eyes met. Voss's were wide with terror and disbelief. Pull. Eli strained, boots digging furrows. Drop the derringer. Voss hesitated. That was enough. The hidden pistol slipped from his sleeve, not away but up, angling toward Eli's face. Ash saw it first. The wolf struck the root with both forepaws. The wood tore free. Voss fell without another word, hit the rocks below with a sound final enough to silence even the birds. For a long moment no one moved. Then Deke, bleeding and half-mad, tried to crawl toward his rifle. Caleb rose, jaw clenched against pain, and kicked it beyond reach. The third rider threw down his gun entirely. By the time Marshall Bell and Ada Miller came up the lower trail with two ranch hands behind them, the story had already arranged itself in plain sight. Burned pasture below. Voss dead by his own violence. Deke with claw marks, blood, and brass buttons matching the coat strip Eli laid on the stone. The survey marker. The letter. The surviving rider shaking hard enough to confess before Bell even finished asking. Bell took off his hat and looked at Eli a long time. Should have listened sooner. Yes, Eli said. It was all the answer needed. The weeks after moved slower, as healing things do. Neighbors helped raise a new barn frame. Ada testified. The bank voided the seizure. Sam Mercer's death was named murder at last in county records, late but clean. Caleb kept the scar in his arm and wore it proudly. May never stopped carrying the bone whistle. Ruth planted winter beans in soil blackened by fire because that was what women like her did. They put life where ruin had been and dared the world to object. Ash never became tame. Eli would not have wanted that for him, but he stayed near. At dusk a gray shape often appeared on the ridge above the pasture, watching while smoke rose gentle from the rebuilt chimney and laughter drifted from the yard. Some nights Hannah, growing quick and fearless, would wave a little hand toward the dark and babble as if speaking to kin. Years later, travelers passing through Red Hollow still pointed to the Mercer place and told how mercy once cost a starving wolf one coat, one chance, and one man's pride. They said the family kept their land because they finally stood together and because the wild remembers a hand that cuts wire instead of tightening it. On quiet evenings, When the sun bled gold across the grass and the new barn cast a long, clean shadow, Eli would rest his arms on the fence beside Ruth and watch a silver-backed wolf pause on the far hill before turning toward the endless western light.